Days out from the US election, social media giants have been exposed for silencing journalism critical of Joe Biden and censoring conservative viewpoints they disagree with. The most egregious of these events happened when Facebook and Twitter sought to censor entirely accurate reports by the New York Post, which published emails proving Joe Biden met with an advisor to corrupt Ukrainian company Burisma while his son Hunter was on the board. Joe Biden also withheld $1 billion of foreign aid to Ukraine until a prosecutor investigating this same company was sacked. But social media giants, which claim to be platforms, not publishers, in order to get legal protection from defamation cases, deployed fact-checkers in an attempt to kill the story. They couldn't prove the New York Post had fabricated the emails because it hadn't, so instead Facebook and Twitter ruled the public had no right to see them because they couldn't verify the origins on the emails. This is a standard not abided by when organisations such as the New York Times publish Donald Trump's leaked and therefore illegally obtained tax returns, or the equally illegally obtained covertly recorded audio of Melania Trump, which attempted to cast her in a bad light. But despite the efforts of some of the world's most powerful tech billionaires to bury the Biden corruption story, it took off. When Joe Biden's campaign denied the reports, it triggered anger from Hunter Biden's business partner, Tony BOBULINSKI, who decided to go public with another bombshell development. He accused presidential hopeful of being part of a scheme to make millions of dollars through business deals in China.
It would be different if this was my word against Jim Biden, Hunter Biden, and Joe Biden.
Right.
That would be a very slippery slope, not something I would take the personal and family risk on it. But I've provided more documents and facts that validate times, meetings, who participated. That email to me on May 13th was generated by somebody else sent to me. It wasn't me generating. These text messages that I've provided are Hunter Biden in the first person, Jim Biden in the first person, James Gilliar in the first person, Rob Walker in the first person. It's not me generating the text messages. It's them speaking.
For news organisations, reporting on these important developments has become dangerous. If an anonymous fact-checker living on the other side of the world subjectively disagrees with the story based on their own gut judgment, they can block it, ban your social channel, and disrupt your revenue streams instantly. The risk for reporting the truth has to be balanced against anticipating backlash from Silicon Valley. This extraordinarily depressing truth is hogtying news organisations globally, narrowing the field of acceptable discourse and creating anti-intellectual commentary which results in an echo chamber in news reporting. Only a few days ago here at Sky News, we were ordered by Facebook to edit our own website because we published a gaffe of Joe Biden appearing to mistakenly name his chief political opponent as George Bush instead of Donald Trump.
This is the most consequential, not because I'm running, but because who I'm running against. This is the most consequential election in a long time. And the character of the country, in my view, is literally on the ballot. What kind of country we're going to be? 4 more years of George, he's going to find ourselves in a position where if Trump gets elected, we're going to be in a different world.
Now, when Biden references 4 more years of George, it is obvious to us, and I'm sure to everyone at home, who he is talking about. 4 years is the standard presidential term, but more to the point, President Trump came out saying he interpreted the gaffe as a reference to Republican President George Bush. Even ABC's Media Watch suggested the Democrat defense of the gaffe was questionable.
But did Joe call him George?
Democrat supporters say he's referring to actor and comedian George Lopez, who was also taking part in the Zoom call.
That's true, but he does say
4 more years of George.
And it's not like Joe hasn't mashed it up before.
And regardless of what Biden meant to say, the gaffe is funny, and media outlets should be free to play it over and over again and comment on their interpretation of Biden's words. But Facebook fact-checkers believe they have some insight into Biden's consciousness that the rest of us don't. They argue that it is an indisputable fact that Joe did not slip up, and instead he was talking about a voter and actor named George Lopez. The post by Sky News was censored by Facebook until we published the fact-checker's verdict on our own website. Now, over recent weeks, Sky News posts have been downgraded in algorithms and hidden from users on Facebook for several days until we change headlines and even text to make fact-checkers living in France happy. This email up on the screen shows the extraordinary overreach by Facebook fact-checkers who are employed to police our news judgment. These fact-checkers from other countries threatening to de-rank our content in their algorithms until we publish what news lines they want. Now, the algorithm punishment hurt our numbers, but thanks to all our loyal viewers, we are still the #1 Australian media page on Facebook. Facebook is no longer just a platform. They are publishers, and every day they are dictating editorial policy at news organisations around the world. If this hasn't terrified you yet, it gets worse. The problem has become so bad that Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg and Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey were hauled before a Senate inquiry this week in the US in order to explain why it appeared only conservative journalism content was being censored. Dorsey was even asked why Twitter regularly labelled Donald Trump's leaks as fake news when it ignored content from Iranian dictators calling for an end to Israel through, quote, firm armed resistance.
The first tweet says this, and I quote each time, "The Zionist regime is a deadly, cancerous growth and a detriment to the region. It will undoubtedly be uprooted and destroyed. The only remedy until the removal of the Zionist regime is firm armed resistance. The struggle to free Palestine is jihad in the way of God. We will support and assist any nation or any group anywhere who opposes and fights the Zionist regime." These tweets are still up. How, Mr. Dorsey, is that acceptable based on your policies at Twitter?
Well, we believe it's important for everyone to hear from global leaders.
Respecting the rights of dictators to speak and call for violence against Jewish people, that gets a free pass? But President Donald Trump and American journalists are far too vile for public consumption? Now, to be blunt, Jack Dorsey may be the CEO of Twitter, but just look at him and listen to his arguments. He is a crazy and dangerous person, and he is one of the tech oligarchs deciding what is news and what is not. The New York Post refused to bend its news reporting to Dorsey's will, and in return, he banned them from posting on Twitter indefinitely. Tech giants such as Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg are so powerful, they think they are accountable to no one. Perhaps it is time to rewrite the rules of the game and introduce legislation to force these tech companies to keep their biases and opinions out of newsrooms. If we don't, they will continue to influence elections and blur the lines between truth and fiction. Well, I'm joined here on the desk by veteran commentator Kel Richards and, of course, Sky News contributor Gemma Tognini. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Jack. Great to be here. Hey, Kel.
Hi, and thank you for calling me a veteran. It makes me feel so much better.
Well, look, why don't we start with you? Look, am I too harsh on the social media giants, or do you think they need to be reined in? Is this an overreach?
It's definitely an overreach, and I must say that listening to your editorial, it was quite horrifying. I can't understand why it's taking so long to treat them as publishers, because they are clearly publishers. These fact checkers are no different from, for example, an editor, a sub-editor, or a producer in a traditional newsroom. Exactly. They are having an input into content. They are deciding what is and what isn't real. The fact is that it's so disturbing that there's a big part of the population that actually source their news from these Facebook, news groups or mums groups or whatever. It's clearly being influenced, but more importantly, any steps that governments have taken to treat them as publishers, because they should be fast-tracked. They absolutely should be fast-tracked.
Because I think that's one of the keys. They always argue, well, you can't sue us for defamation. We're just the platform and we're not publishers. But now, secretly, behind closed doors, and I know that they're doing this to every news organisation, they're flagging content. And not only are they asking them to change the post, but Kel, also the headlines on a website. They're editing our website. They're now my editor.
Yes. I mean, it's true. You and I have talked about this before. We long before any of the legislators started talking about it, Jack and I agreed they are publishers. Their argument is they don't generate the content. They just, people post things and whatever, so they're just providing the platform. If you publish on your platform, you're a publisher. And there are a couple of examples. Radio Talkback is like that. Although Radio Talkback admits that their host and their call vetter are people they employ and they're responsible for, the callers, they are also responsible for, because regardless of whether they generate the content from the callers, that content is part of what they publish. So publishing law applies to radio programs that run talkback. But there used to be, some time ago, it was killed by social media, a weekly newspaper called The Trading Post. It consisted of nothing but classified ads. The whole of its content came from its readers. But it was still a publisher presenting a publication. So the rules of publishing have to apply to them. The worrying thing, Jack, is no government in the world is tackling this. None of them are saying they have to be publishers. In America, they've got this hearing you referred to in the Senate, they're talking about changing Section 230 of a Decency on the Internet, I think it's called, Act that was passed in 1996. So it's 24 years old and it should be changed. That's all they're talking about changing. They're not talking about classifying them as publishers. In Australia, we've got what I think is a very feeble attempt to make these media giants pay for the journalism they steal, but we're still not classifying them as publishers. So step one is classifying them as publishers. Step two is breaking them up.
Exactly, and Twitter isn't even part of this draft code of conduct. So they've actually escaped being included in this, which I think is a massive mistake.
And I don't actually understand the reticence of government to tackle it, because we all know that Twitter is not
spinelessness.
real life.
It is sheer spinelessness.
And it's, 18% of the population, I'm not sure if it's 18% of the population or 18% of people on social media use Twitter. So it's not like a huge stakeholder group that the government is potentially going to upset. And you could also argue that probably government or Conservative voters don't really sit on Twitter the way that the left does. So I don't quite understand their reticence. Maybe in the hierarchy of need, legislative need, it's a nice to have, not a need to have. But the broader impact is the impact on information.
Yes.
And the ability for information to be messed with. I mean, I remember as a young journalist this conversation around fairness and accuracy, and I bang on about it all the time, because once an old journalist, always an old journalist. But the bottom line is your obligation is fairness and accuracy. Everything else is a bonus. And we know that what we're getting here is deeply altered information, skewed to the political views and the agendas of the founders of these organisations.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the biggest problem as well, there are egregious examples of manipulated media and fake news. But when you've got content which is maybe subjectively you don't like the headlines someone used, and then you're editorialising as a platform, that's when you're crossing the line. That's when these fact checkers have overreached.
And the point about the New York Post's, the censorship of the New York Post, I think, which is really important to understand, is, you know, they censored this story, but all it did was drive people to other platforms that published that story. So it was a Pyrrhic victory for Twitter in many senses, because you know, can't see it on Twitter, I'll go online, I'll go to the New York Post website.
Exactly.